Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Burnt Pancakes podcast. I'm your host, Katie Fensky, and I am here to remind moms that everyone burns their first pancake. And I'm telling you, you guys, my kids have been off for 3 weeks and things are burning around this house. They go back to school finally on Monday. So a few more days, but almost there. On today's podcast, I have on a very special mom, Christy Gmyr, and she is a licensed mental health counselor and coach for moms. She is coming on to talk about how we felt when we went back to work. So, leaving maternity leave and going back to work, and what the challenges and struggles that working moms face, how we can set boundaries, how we can handle mom guilt, our marriage, all things. So, you're really going to enjoy this conversation. We get very honest about how things really felt being working moms. So, please enjoy this episode, this momversation with Christy Gmyr. Christy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, I just love chatting with moms about mom life. So this is going to be so fun. Will you start off just by introducing yourself? Let us know where you're from, how many kids you have.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Christy Gmyr, and I live in Syracuse, New York. I'm a mom of two kids. I have a little girl who is 8 and a little boy who is 4. So very, very fun ages.
This is such a fun age. I was just telling someone who has a 9-month-old baby. She's like, "How old are your kids?" I'm like, "They're 10. What are they? 7?" And my youngest just turned 5. I'm like, this is such a fun age. Like I do kind of miss the baby age, but it's just fun. Like they're still young, they're still little, but they're so much easier than they were when they
Yeah.
were toddler. It is a
Yeah.
really fun age.
hmm
Um, okay, we are going to discuss a little bit about like maternity leave, becoming a new mom, adjusting to working, which when you submitted to me your submission and you described what that was like for you, I was like, oh my God, like that's
hmm
totally how I felt. So, what line of work were you doing when you had your daughter? So, your daughter's the oldest one. What line of
Yeah.
work were you doing?
So I am a mental health therapist, and I have been in the mental health field ever since I finished graduate school. At that time, I was working at an agency. I had been working as a therapist, but then I was also working in I had been transitioning to some management positions. And so at that time, I was actually in the middle of transitioning between two different management
Oh,
positions.
wow.
Actually, when I was pregnant, my boss had offered me an opportunity to take on a director role, which started right after I came back from my maternity
Oh,
leave. So I was
goodness.
sort of in between those two things when all of that was happening.
Wow. Okay. So, what was that experience like when you had your firstborn, maternity leave, going back to work? How was that for you?
It was hard, harder than I expected.
Yeah.
So just to sort of mention, before I went back to work when I was pregnant, if I'm being totally honest, there was a time when I was not totally excited about going back to work. My family, there are a lot of stay-at-home moms, people who didn't have kids yet were planning on being stay-at-home moms. And at the time, I thought that's what I wanted for myself. Deep down, I knew that that really wasn't going to be what was best for me. And I also wasn't going to be very realistic because of financially and things like that. So I was already struggling emotionally with that, knowing that I was the first person in my family to use daycare to go back to work. And so that was already really hard. Then on top of that, um, I maternity leave is not great in this country. I had 12 weeks of FMLA. I wanted to use it all for the time with the baby, but unfortunately
Mhm.
my doctor had pulled me out a few weeks early, and so by the time I had to go back, I didn't get that full 12 weeks and I just not did not feel ready. I tried reaching out to my employer. I talked to human resources to try to extend that time. Maybe that was a misguided idea. I thought that maybe if I just didn't get paid or didn't have my health insurance, I thought maybe
Mhm.
it would work out in some way, and was essentially just told it wasn't an option. So I was feeling frustrated with that. And then there were just so many things that I wasn't prepared for, things that nobody tells you about, nobody talks to you about. I was for starters, completely unfamiliar with the sleep habits of newborns. I knew that they didn't sleep. Like that's what everybody tells you, but I didn't know what that really looked like. And so I would have days when I would, drop my daughter off maybe 7 o'clock in the morning at daycare. I wouldn't get home till 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and then she was going to bed between 6 and 6:30. And so besides getting up at night, I had almost no time with her. So I was feeling guilty about that. She was getting sick all the time. So I was feeling guilty about leaving work.
Yes.
There was a lot that was happening then.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So much of that. Okay. I do want to go back to how you said how you felt about being a stay-at-home mom, not going back. It just didn't feel right for you. I kind of had the opposite feeling, but I love that you brought up both perspectives. So for me, I really wanted to be that stay-at-home mom, but I had to go back to work. It was like not an option. And it was really, again, it was really hard to send my kids to daycare. And at least I had some family that helped. And then I used daycare. But for me, it was that internal, like, I was just angry that I had to go back. Like, I want to stay home with my baby. Like, it's not easy being home by any means,
Mhm.
but leaving him, like, I just got mad about it to the point that I didn't even start looking for childcare during my maternity leave until 2 weeks before I had to go back. I was in
Wow.
such denial that, like, I have to leave him
Hmm.
and go back to working. So it's interesting. Like, I do think moms are like, like, really want to work. Like that's where they find their purpose and like need to be away. Some people just want to be stay-at-home moms and it's hard either way, and then that
Well,
decision is so hard.
and just to clarify, there was a time when I didn't want to go back to work. I also experienced a lot of that anger and frustration around that. I think what I mean is though that deep down, one, I knew that financially it just wasn't an option. I knew that even if I tried to get my husband on board with that, deep down, I knew that for our family, I needed to be working and
Yeah.
making money. But the other thing is I know myself and I know that I
Mhm.
get restless if I'm just
Yeah.
like home all day. And so I was telling myself that I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but deep down, I knew that that probably really wasn't for me.
Yeah.
Um, I was just sort of getting myself to that mentally. And honestly, now it ended up working out great because going back to work for me and for our family, daycare, all of that ended up being some of the best decisions we could have made.
Yeah. Yeah. And also how you talked about the newborn sleep. I don't think anyone talks about not only like not knowing newborn sleep, but what that does to you as a mom, as a
Mhm.
human being that's not getting enough sleep. That was probably one of the hardest parts about going back to work for me is just physically exhausted and having to keep pushing through and keep pushing through and just being
Mhm.
like, I just need a break, but you just can't catch up.
Well, and on top of that, my kids were terrible sleepers. My youngest still is. My daughter didn't sleep through the night until she was maybe 15 months old. My
Hmm.
youngest didn't sleep through the night until he was two. It was
Yeah.
awful. That was a
Yeah.
really hard 2 years.
Yeah. And I don't know if you felt this way, but I used to have to get up. I would have to leave for work about 6:15. So I would have to wake up my son, 5:45 to breastfeed him and then get him ready and get the car packed and get everything up. And I remember feeling like, did I make him a bad sleeper because I'm interrupting like when he'd normally wake up? Like my one friend was like, oh yeah, my kids sleep till 7. I
Mhm.
don't know if that's the case that I messed
Mhm.
him up, but that was the thing going through my head. Like if I didn't have to leave for work so early, he could sleep till his normal wake up time. Now I'm creating this early bird. And I
When
felt so
really all
bad.
kids are so different. I mean, my 4-year-old still doesn't sleep till 7. He's awake
Right.
on weekends and by like 6 o'clock,
Right.
even now.
Yep. My
Hmm.
worst sleeper is now my best sleeper. Like my
Hmm.
middle was he would take 20-minute naps and like, oh my God, he was such a bad sleeper. Wake up every hour. And now he's
Hmm.
the hit the pillow, falls asleep, and I can barely get him up in the morning. So I'm like, it wasn't me going to work. But those are the thoughts that go through your head when you're this
Hmm.
like brand new mom trying to navigate. And then did you pump? Did you use formula? Would you?
Yeah, so that was another thing. I had always planned on breastfeeding, but this was another thing that nobody talked to me about. And
Mhm.
I wasn't able to breastfeed with my daughter. It was just so hard. She wouldn't
Yeah.
latch. And so I ended up after dealing with those emotional challenges around that, I decided to switch up my plans and I wanted to pump exclusively for a year. So that was my goal.
Wow.
So, and I did it. I did it for a year, but it was not
Wow.
easy. I had to pump in the middle of the day, 3 times a
Hmm.
day. I was carving out that time. And I felt very fortunate that I did have an office where I could close my door and my employers didn't give me a hard time about it. They were supportive about that. But I also know a lot of moms don't have that. I hear so
Yeah.
many stories from moms who are pumping in a closet or, are not able to, aren't given that time at all, So
Mhm.
even with the challenges that I had, I still recognize that I was fortunate in that way. But when I say that out loud, like that's not okay. It's not
Yeah.
okay that those
Right.
are the things I have to feel fortunate
Like
about.
everyone should have that option.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
remember pumping while I was driving because
Hmm.
my option was because I lived like 45 minutes from work. So it was a bit of a commute. And like the minute I could leave work, I was a teacher at the time. The minute
Hmm.
I could leave, I wanted to go pick up my son. I was like, I have been
Hmm.
away from him all day. So then we get in the car and I'm like, I could either stay at work for another 20, 30 minutes and pump, or I could
Hmm.
go pick him up and pump while I'm driving. Probably not safe. It was hands-free though. It was hands I was like, I can't believe I did that.
Mhm.
But it was like survival mode, you know? But I
Yeah.
do feel like going back to work greatly affected my supply. Pumping was not, it did not help me with breastfeeding. And had I switched to formula sooner, I probably would have taken a lot of stress off myself. But I was so like, I'm gonna do it till he's one, and I almost killed myself trying to
Well,
breastfeed
it's
this kid.
hard.
A
It's
lot.
hard. And if I'm being completely honest, I mean, part of it is, that those are sort of the expectations, right? These are the things that
Mhm.
we're being told, but also a big part of it was financial. I didn't want to pay for formula.
Totally. Totally agree. I actually made my husband because my son finally got to like a weight limit that the doctor's like, he's not sleeping through the night because he's hungry. He's
Mhm.
losing a lot of weight. And I finally was just like, okay, I'm so exhausted. Like, I will try this. I made my husband go to the store and buy the formula for the first time because I'm like, I can't bring myself to do it. But
Mhm.
once we switched and like everything was fine and he started gaining weight, I'm like, it was like such a relief. I just felt
Mhm.
relieved, like it's okay, he's fine. And now
Yeah.
I can not get up at 11 o'clock at night to pump so that
Mhm.
there's enough for tomorrow. Yeah. That was
Well, and we did use formula too, not as part of our long-term plan, but
Mhm.
at the beginning, my kids are both, they're very, even now, they're both just very small children, very low percentile. And so
Mhm.
we also had to supplement with formula just to get their weight up. And
Yes.
unfortunately, once they got to that healthy weight, then we were able to transition over to just pumping.
Mhm.
And then that
Well,
was.
God, applause to you because that I think that is probably the hardest thing is to pump exclusively.
Hmm.
Oh gosh, I don't know how you did it.
I hear people say that. I know other people who said, "Oh, pumping is so much harder than breastfeeding." But when I had my second child, he was better at breastfeeding than my daughter. But then I just opted to switch to pumping because I personally found
That's the
pumping to be
norm.
easier because
Hmm.
one of the my early experiences with him was thinking like, oh, I have to go to the store, but I have to bring him with me because he has to feed soon. At least with pumping, it's like you're on your schedule, you do it, and
Yeah,
then it's just there and it's ready. And so I'm sure there are pros and cons to both. Overall,
totally.
I felt like pumping worked better for me.
But what I love about that is you looked at your own personal like needs. What
Hmm.
do I need? You know, like
Hmm.
do I need that connection? Do I need the freedom you get from not having to have a baby attached to you? So I
Yeah.
love that because a lot of people don't talk a lot about how you can be involved in that decision making.
Yeah,
It's your choice.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so let's talk about when your son was born. Did you have a different experience? Did it feel a little bit easier? How was it?
So when my son was born, it was very difficult, but for entirely different reasons.
Oh, because he's 4, I'm guessing.
He
Okay.
was born March 16th, 2020, the
Oh my
day the world was
gosh.
shutting down.
That was literally the day my son did not go back to school.
Yes, same
Oh
with my
my
daughter. The day the world was
gosh.
shutting down, I was in a
So at
hospital having a
least
baby.
Okay, let me think about it. When you had him, it was not masked yet. When you were at the hospital, were you okay having both of you there? There were no tests yet. So, Oh,
We were
wow.
both able to be there, although it was still very early. They were still hospitals were figuring out
Yes.
these new
Okay.
policies. At one time, my husband had to leave the hospital. I don't remember why, if it was to get food or the car. He went to left to do something, and they
Hmm.
almost didn't let him back in, which we were not expecting that. He was able to get back in. But yeah, I remember being at the hospital and hearing everything was shutting down. All the schools were getting ready to
Yeah.
do this. And the nurses were standing in the room talking about how, oh my gosh, I heard this thing might last for 6 whole weeks. And I was thinking, 6 weeks? How am I going to have my daughter home for
I thought the
weeks?
same thing. I was so naive. I thought like, oh, I will go back after spring break because I think our spring break was somewhere in there. And my husband's like, I don't think so. I'm like, we'll go back before the end of the school year. Little
Hmm.
did I know. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So that was challenging again, just for all of the reasons related to COVID. So for starters,
Mhm.
my hospital stay, with a C-section, I was able to stay for 3 days. And with my daughter, I took advantage of the full 3 days to have the
Yep.
support from the nurses. But with my son, COVID was still so new. Nobody really knew what it was.
Mhm.
And we were kind of afraid to be at the
Scary.
hospital. Yeah. So we
Yeah.
just wanted to get out of there and get home like as quickly as we could. And then once we were home, we wanted to keep everybody away. So we had no family or friends coming over,
Wow.
which was very different. My daughter, who I was expecting to be at daycare, was suddenly home with me for 10 weeks. And so I didn't get that time with just him like I had
Mhm.
expected to. She had, my husband was at work. He was an essential employee. So he was
Okay.
going to work every day. And so it was just me and the two kids when I wasn't expecting her to be there. And she had nobody to play with. She was 4 at the time.
Yeah.
So
That's
it,
hard.
it
No
was
play
hard.
dates. Like,
No play
oh, you
dates,
couldn't do anything.
nothing.
That's challenging. When you
Yeah.
did go back to work, were you in person or were you virtual?
So I was virtual. I ended up working
Okay.
virtual for 3 years. I actually just went back to an office about a year ago. But that was tricky in itself because, as a therapist, I schedule appointments and I don't want to cancel sessions. It's not fair to the clients. It's not good financially for our family because if I'm
Mhm.
not working, I'm not making any money. And so the problem with daycare, both of my kids did end up going back to daycare during that time, but if you had even one kid in the classroom who was sick, they were shutting down entire
2
rooms
weeks.
for, 2 weeks. And
Yeah.
so what I ended up doing was being self-employed, I had this flexibility that I was very grateful for, but I ended up switching my schedule around so that when they were at daycare, I was home doing my administrative work. And then what I would do is I scheduled all my sessions at night from after my husband got home. So he would
Okay.
come home and then I would lock myself in a bedroom and go do my sessions.
Ah,
So I was essentially using daycare time to do the things that could be easily put on hold if
right.
suddenly their classroom shut down. And then again, I wasn't around for them because I was upstairs working.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. So very different situation.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
Oh,
eventually, things with COVID kind of started to get a little bit easier. Things kind of went back to normal. And then I just had all the just regular challenges of being a parent, of being a working
yes.
parent.
Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
So is your youngest now? So my youngest just turned 5. We did like right before COVID, he came in. So he had a couple months of normal before it all shut down. Is he going to be starting kindergarten next year?
Yep, he is in
Okay.
pre-K this year. So he
Okay.
just started the elementary school a few months ago.
How is that with both of them in school now?
Good. It's nice having them both on the same schedule.
You know, I was thinking the same thing. I was just telling someone that I have all 3 of my boys, same school, same time I pick up and drop off, and it's been very nice.
Yes, it
Very
frees
nice.
up an extra 45 minutes every morning,
Oh my
45
gosh, it's
minutes every
great.
evening.
Yes.
So yeah, that's been great.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about setting boundaries at work and home because I know you work with moms about doing this.
Mhm.
How do we do it? It's so hard to set boundaries. How at work and home? How do you, because sometimes we feel like if I'm giving it my all at work, I'm failing at home. And when I'm like doing my best at home, my work, I'm slacking. How do we do both?
Yeah, well, and it's hard. I mean, for starters, to address that point, I do think that we get those messages from everywhere, and that we have to be everything to everybody all the time, and that if we are not doing everything perfectly, then maybe we're failing in some way, which is not true, but that's what we're being
Yeah.
told, and so we
And
have
we
all the
tell
pressure.
ourselves that too. Yeah, I
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when we don't have time, when we're putting all this pressure on ourselves, a lot of times the very first thing to go is taking care of ourselves. We tend to put that last. And so boundaries are really challenging, obviously, for a lot of reasons. Some people think that they're being selfish. They don't think it's okay to set boundaries. Sometimes people are concerned about the response and the reaction of the other people, whether there's going to be a conflict or whether they're letting those people down in some ways. But I think one of the things that's really important to know is that boundaries, for starters, are not selfish. They are necessary. It is okay to set boundaries. We're not being rude. It's important for us to be mindful of our delivery, but it really is okay. And that is how we take care of ourselves. And that's actually a way to take care of our relationships with other people too. And so when we're setting boundaries, I mean, there are a lot of ways to do this, but I think for starters, it really comes down to communication and just unapologetically knowing that it's okay to say no to things. So at work, and granted, I recognize everybody's jobs and situations are very different. So this
Can't
is
just
a
say no
very
to your boss anytime you want.
yeah. Well, and some people maybe that's easier, and other people it's
Yeah.
a lot harder. So each of these things is obviously going to be specific to the individual. But, I think that if you do have a relationship with your boss where you're able to talk about those things, it can be really helpful to sort of let them know what your needs are, what you're able to do, managing expectations, maybe try not answering emails, on weekends, times that you're supposed to be off the clock, things like that.
That's something
Um,
I learned. Like I told myself, I think it was when my son was born. I literally took at the time phones were a little bit older. I
mhm,
took my work email off my phone so that I would
mhm,
not answer emails when I was at home. And that made a world of difference because I used to check my email first thing in the morning when I wake up and I'd get a parent email and the whole drive there, I'd be like stressed and stewing over it. And I had to say,
mhm,
I will answer it at work. I'll answer it while I'm there.
mhm.
And that's
And
it.
that's really hard for a lot of people. I give you
Hmm.
a lot of credit for that. And for people who don't feel like they can actually take it off their phones, I encourage them to take the notifications down so that they're not at least seeing
Good
when those
idea.
emails and text messages are coming in.
Mhm.
So those kinds of things. At home, similar idea where we just have to know that it's okay to say no, manage those expectations, communicate those things to people. If you have some people who are maybe coming over to spend some time with you, it's okay to let them know what time you are available until so that they're not accidentally overstaying their welcome, when you want to be going
Mhm.
to bed, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And again, just knowing that it really is okay and setting boundaries is not selfish.
Yes, for sure. Um, Going kind of along with that, mom guilt. Like we
Mhm.
all feel it. And I don't
Mhm.
know. Like I ask my mom all the time, I'm like, was motherhood hard? Did you feel this way? And I'm sure it was, but it's been so long since she's had little
Mhm.
kids. So maybe, it fades a little bit. But I'm like, I feel like in today's society, the mom guilt is like through the roof.
Oh, yes.
Why do you think it is, and how do we deal with that constant pressure?
Well, back to what we were talking about before, I think a big part of the reason is because of the expectations that we get. I think that as moms, we have been conditioned in some ways to believe that this is what we have to do, this is what we're supposed to do. And if we don't do it, then maybe we're a bad mom or a bad employee or whatever it might be. So those expectations. Now, one of the things that I talk to people, my clients about a lot is this idea that our feelings are not a direct result of other people or situations or events, but it's our interpretation of those events. So it's the way that we are thinking about it, that internal dialogue. So when we're feeling guilty, a lot of times it's because we believe that we either have done something wrong or we believe that we're not meeting somebody's expectations. We're letting them down in some way. And then the other part of that too is I think a lot of times people confuse feelings of guilt with other feelings. So if we have to miss out on a child's activity, for example, or event, one of the things, and we're feeling guilty about that, one of the things that I encourage moms to do is to first sort of reflect on, do you feel like you were doing something wrong by doing this? Sometimes they say yes, a lot of times they say no. And then, so the next question, for them to reflect on is, okay, so do you feel like you're letting down your child in some way? And a lot of times that's what it's about. If the answer to that is no, then sometimes I question, well, is it actually guilt that you're experiencing, or is it maybe more disappointment or sadness because you would like to be doing these things? You're not doing
Mhm.
anything wrong, but you just really want to be part of that. You want to be doing those things. So really just sort of like paying attention to and becoming more aware of like what those thoughts are, and then trying to challenge those thoughts and replace them with, reframe them or replace them um with thoughts based on the factual information that we have available to us.
That's a good one because when I was working full time and I would have to miss like the Christmas party at school. That's
Mhm.
exactly how I felt. And it was a lot of like, I want to be there. Like I want to enjoy that with my son. Not necessarily they're gonna be like, Mom, you weren't there. But it was like
Mhm.
I felt like I was missing out on some of the things that moms do that I couldn't do because I was working. That's
Mhm.
wow, that's a really good point. Mm.
Mhm.
Um, okay, let's talk marriage a little bit.
Okay.
Um, for me, going back to work was very emotional. Not only was I physically tired, but I was just emotionally exhausted. And I could tell like my husband and I were navigating that together. It was the first time that it wasn't just the two of us.
Mhm.
How do you help moms with marriage with little kids and dealing with all the things that go into that?
Mhm. This is tricky, and I think part of the thing that makes it so tricky is that every marriage is different, every relationship is different. Some people really find themselves in situations where they don't feel like they have the support of their partner, whereas other people feel like they do have the support of their partner, but maybe they're not getting the kind of support that they really want or need for a number of reasons. So those are two different kinds of
Mhm.
problems, but they're both significant. So in terms of the moms who maybe feel like they don't have support, one of the things that I talk to them about a lot is sort of this idea of recognizing the things that we have control over, what we don't have control over, and a lot of times, we don't have control over our spouses. We can talk to them, we can
Mhm.
try to get them to see things from our perspective, but it doesn't always work. And so really sort of working on the mindset piece around that, thinking about our whys, like the reasons that we make the choices that we do, what do we have control over, things like that. Now, in terms of the moms who feel like they really do have a lot of support from their partners, it can be about two things. So one, it's about having that communication, making sure that you are talking to them about what you need so that they know they're not mind readers. We have to let them
Nope.
know, but then the other part of it is again this mindset piece. One of the things that I always come back to this example because I feel like it just really stood out to me. But, our lives are set up, my husband and mine are set up so that, I get done with work a little bit earlier, I get my kids off the bus, and then after they go to bed, maybe I go and do some more work. So I get home before him every day. And so when he comes home, we are already there, and I'm already in the middle of, getting them a snack, getting them ready for their activities, getting them dinner, or getting them baths, whatever it is that they need.
Hmm.
And so a lot of times when he comes home, one of the first things that he will do is sit down on the couch and look at his phone. Or he will go upstairs to change and not come back down for a little bit. And that used to make me so mad. And we used to, have all these arguments about it. And then one day it sort of clicked where I realized he wasn't actually doing anything wrong. It wasn't that he wasn't coming back and leaving me to do everything. It was that a few minutes to
Hmm.
himself to sort of recharge, regroup after his work day, 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes. And then he's ready to come help. And that's actually a good thing. That's him taking
Yeah.
care of himself. And he would support me if I was trying to do those same things. And so for me, it was about shifting that mindset around my expectations and what is okay and what's not okay. So that's obviously just one example, but that's the other part of it, right? Is having the conversation, but also taking a look at what our expectations are and doing that mindset work.
Right. And I love that you're taking into account his needs because so many times we're probably thinking, I need help. How does he not see that I need help? But he just came home to like commotion. And
Hmm.
you're right. He has some needs too. I that that's a great thing to think about because now I'll use that example. Because like I noticed my husband when he gets up in the morning, it's usually when the kids are getting up and we have to get them ready for school, and he'll go out and do his workout. And for a while I was like, well, hello, aren't you going to help me get the kids ready? But he's the type of person, he needs his morning workout. And like I
Mhm.
started realizing like he needs that time to be able to function the rest of the day. And I can easily not easily get the kids ready for school. They're crazy, but I can handle that, so like that's his time. And instead of just sitting there and stewing, be like, he's getting his workout. It's like, no, he's getting himself ready so that he can function the rest of the day.
Well, and then the other part that I would sort of wonder about too is, when we are feeling angry or resentful that our partners are taking time to do those things, is part of that resentment because we want to be having that time too. And if we are not, getting our own workout in, doing the things that we feel like we need to do,
Mhm.
then I think it's important to reflect on the reasons why that's not happening. Is that because they're not supporting us and we really can't find that time? Or is that maybe coming from us because they would support us, but we're not making it a priority. We're
Right.
not communicating it or making it happen.
Right. And that's where talking is important, which like it's still like we've been married almost let's see, it'll be 15 years. I'm trying to remember. But it's like we're still working on communication. Like you still have to practice that all the time, especially when you have kids and you're distracted by
Yeah,
all of that that's going on.
yeah, absolutely. So it's
So
hard. I mean, relationships are tricky. They're tricky even without kids. And then you throw kids into the
for
mix
sure.
and
And
a
then you throw
whole new
those kids
game.
in. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
I would love to hear how your experience being a mom has led you to become a coach for moms. Like how did that come about?
Yeah, so as I had mentioned, I've been working as a therapist for a number of years at this point, and a lot of times, as part of being therapists, we're constantly doing a lot of our own work and our own self-reflection and things like that. And I just, I realized that these moms, I have such a passion for helping them because, you know, I'm one of them. I can
Mhm.
relate to it. I understand it. I get it. I know that a lot of times they really don't have the support. Being a working mom can feel so isolating. A lot of times we feel like we're the only ones having these struggles. And so it just, I know the experiences that I went through, and I feel like I've learned a lot of ways to manage that through my experiences and also through my therapy work. And
Mhm.
I just really want to I just really want to use that because, being a mom is such an important thing. It really is. And, we shouldn't have to give up our careers. We shouldn't have to pick, especially if we don't want to. And
Mhm.
so, it's just something that feels really important to me.
Nice. What exactly does like a mom coach look like? Is it a virtual meeting? Is it like a group? What do you offer?
Yeah, so, well, I have a few things. So, for starters, I do have a free Facebook group, which is just for anybody. Those are not necessarily my coaching clients, but I put a lot of resources out there. I do these weekly live trainings to kind of talk about, some of these different topics, things like that. And then I have a group coaching program, which is, that's what I do with my clients. So I have an online course where I kind of talk about all these things, but in much more depth and detail. And then I do the weekly coaching calls, with those ladies, and offer them the support that way as they are trying to navigate these things.
That's awesome. Where can we find you if we were looking for
Yeah, of
information?
course. So my Facebook group, which I invite, any of these ladies who are interested to join, is called Thrive as a Career-Driven Mom. And then I have a website. It's ChristiGmyrCoaching.com. And so Gmyr is Gmyr. A lot of times people invert
I'm
the M
gonna
and
put it
the
in the description. We'll make
yeah,
sure it's
I
spelled
think a
right.
lot of times people invert those two letters. But yeah, so you can find me at my website there. So those would be the best places to look.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your personal story and all of your advice with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great being here.
For all you working moms, I hope you take a minute to yourself to really appreciate how much you are doing and that you're amazing. If you are a stay-at-home mom, you are also working extremely hard. There is no easy job as a mom, but we can all support each other and cheer each other on. So special thanks to Christy for bringing up this topic today. And I look forward to sharing another momversation with you next Friday. So please make sure to subscribe, leave me a comment, leave me a 5-star review. And remember that everyone burns their first pancake. So just keep flipping.